When the holidays start to feel a bit repetitive, reach for a Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry and put your twist on tradition. A bold cranberry and winter spice flavor fusion, Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry is a refreshing way to shake things up this sipping season. And only for a limited time. Sprite, obey your thirst.
Thursday Night Football is on, and it's only on Prime Video.
Wide open, touchdown!
This week, the Dallas Cowboys and Detroit Lions face off in a high-octane clash.
Look at this, it's on the money.
Coverage begins at 7 p.m. Eastern with football's best party. TNF Tonight, presented by Verizon. Not a Prime member? Not a problem. Simply sign up for a 30-day free trial. It's the Cowboys and Lions, Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern, only on Prime Video. Restrictions apply. See Amazon.com/Amazon Prime for details.
Hey, where you been? Buckeye Talk is about to begin. Hey, come on in.
Welcome back to Buckeye Talk. I'm Stephen Means, that's Stefan Krajisnik, and that is Andrew Gillis. And we are coming to you after what is now officially going to be forever known as Negotiation Day. That's what I'm choosing to call it from here on out, because everything is a negotiation. And nobody signs anything anymore. And nobody honors commitments anymore. And nobody does anything that makes any sense. Here are all the things that are happening on Wednesday. So the Big Ten Network is busy putting together a production show to announce all of the defensive award winners and defensive all Big Ten teams for the 2025 season. And they'll do that again today as you're listening to this pod for the offensive side of the ball. There's signing day going on, so a bunch of teenagers are signing what is called in the Big Ten a Big Ten agreement. I'm assuming the SEC and the Big 12 and the ACC have a similar thing where it's just insert conference name agreement, because the letter of intent actually doesn't exist anymore. So we're supposed to be talking about Ohio State's what we woke up Wednesday morning thinking was a 28-man class, the biggest of the Ryan Day era, and we were going to talk with Ryan Day and GM Mark Pantoni about that class. And then I want to say about 90 minutes, is that fair? 90 minutes before we are supposed to have said conversations, Brian Hartline reports were coming out that he is officially going to be the next head coach at South Florida. So that's where we're going to start with this conversation, is that Brian Hartline, Stefan, is no longer going to be Ohio State's offensive coordinator and wide receivers coach whenever the 2025 season ends. The plan, as according to Ryan Day, is that he will continue to be around the program and serve as the offensive coordinator and wide receivers coach throughout the rest of this college football playoff run and Big Ten championship game and all that. And then he is leaving to go to the place that he has been stealing players from for the past 7 years to stock up Ohio State's wide receiver room. What the heck is going on?
Yeah, a million things. That's without mentioning that the Big Ten has provided a statement on the Michigan headset problem. That's without, Julian Sayin being named a finalist for Freshman of the Year award nationally. There's been plenty today, and you can read all about all of that on cleveland.com and get that information via text 614-350-3315. As we're recording this, the sun is out for the first time in Columbus today. It's like beaming through my window now. Just as we started recording, so I'm going to get up and have to attend to that soon. But now
Chris Henry, what if the notification hit our phone as the sun was coming out that Chris Henry Jr. has officially signed as a Buckeye, which as the time of we have started to record this at 2:45 on Wednesday afternoon, that is still not official. You'll know potentially by the time you hear this pod, or maybe you won't. Who knows? But continue.
Yeah. So, anyways, Brian Hartline's leaving, but he's not leaving quite yet. But he's kind of leaving, right? He's going to have to tend to everything that comes with being a head coach now. And let me say this first before we start talking about it. I think the initial reaction from everyone when the news broke of Brian Hartline going to South Florida was, well, I thought he could have landed a better job. Obviously, Penn State being the name that everyone looks at, but when Kentucky opened Brian Hartline's name, every time, he interviewed with West Virginia last year, like every time his name has come up, it's come up in some of these major power conference openings, whether it be Big 12 or Big 10 or SEC, whatever it is. I think this is a perfect opportunity for him. I think that there's probably some power conference openings that are decent that have maybe presented some opportunities to him. But if he goes and shows at USF, which is a really good G5 program, that he can be a good head coach, he doesn't need to go into a situation where it's like, hey, help fix Penn State, help fix West Virginia. He can start getting some offers for some pretty legit programs. You look at, some of the G5 hires through the years and the guys that have come from that level, there's obviously a lot of interest there. So I think this is a great opportunity for Brian Hartline in an area that he knows, how to recruit pretty well, despite, being an Ohio State guy through and through. But it does put Ohio State in an interesting spot. Ryan Day said on Wednesday, the timing sucks, but it's not Brian Hartline's fault. It's kind of college football's fault, to be quite honest. This does, two things can be true. Lane Kiffin handled everything like a total dirtbag, but also the timeline of the college football calendar did not help Lane Kiffin's situation either. Brian Hartline's in that spot, right, where he's handling everything about as well as you can handle it. But the college football calendar says, hey, if you're going to be a head coach, you kind of have to leave before December 6th. Otherwise, you get into, what's going to happen with the portal, and signing day is already passed and all of that. So this is the timeline that Ohio State has to deal with. And the blessing in disguise in all this is that the portal doesn't open till January. So Brian Hartline can kind of be the offensive coordinator right now. And then I'm sure for the 3 weeks between the Big Ten championship game and the Rose Bowl or whatever, bowl Ohio State is in the college football quarterfinals, I think Ryan Day is going to go football mode because he can go football mode in that window there. And Brian Hartline will probably tend to the transition of being South Florida's head coach. And Ryan Day will be the guy who kind of does a lot of the offensive stuff. And then maybe Brian Hartline shows up in LA and they kind of work through some things together again. And, whatever comes with that. But we know that last year for the college football playoff, Ryan Day was able to go ultra football mode and kind of put away the CEO stuff and, class students or the athletes weren't, attending to class. And it all becomes a little bit easier to focus on football during the playoff, which is a good thing. Especially, given the timeline of everything right now with Brian Hartline. So, and I'll toss in on top of that, Ryan Day was asked about it a couple weeks ago when Chip Kelly got fired. If you're listening to this, I either have or haven't gotten a question at Ryan Day's lightning round. I'd like to follow up on that and be like, okay, now what about Chip Kelly? Is he going to come in as some kind of analyst or advisor these next few weeks? It's insane. It's all crazy, but this is all happening at once. And if Ohio State didn't play again until January 1st, I don't think there would be much to worry about. Ohio State plays on Saturday against the number 2 team in the country. And the next podcast you listen to from us is going to be a game preview podcast where we talk about Ohio State's offensive line against the defensive front of Indiana and Indiana's secondary against Ohio State's wide receivers. Like, we are 24 hours away from talking about all of that, almost exactly 24 hours at the time that we're recording. We're going to be talking about a football game, and that all feels insane right now. And I'm going to go check these damn blinds because I can't see anything right now because the sun decided to show up in Columbus.
Speaking of classes, it's also finals week at Ohio State's campus, so there's that part of it as well. They are still everything. There's too many things happening against one. Gillis is drinking a Celsius.
Oh, it might be one of two and 3 on the day.
We had a texter say, "Man, you guys should go get some Celsius." I almost responded, "Oh, the Celsius is gonna get the job done this time." Let's stick with the Heartline stuff first, and part of the reason why we're kind of filibustering here because maybe in this 45-minute long podcast we're going to try to fit in because again, here's today's schedule. It's signing day, so we talked with Ryan Day and Mark Pantoni at noon, but they also are keeping things routine, so we're going to go back to the Woody Wednesday evening to talk to Ryan Day again and get an eye on players and do all those things. So as you're listening to this on Thursday, Wednesday somehow turned into game day long of a work day for us, and it is, and that's complaining. Nobody cares. Everybody has a job to do. Everybody's got a job to do. But Gillis, here's my question for you. Where is Brian Hartline going to be missed most? And I don't think it can be the offensive coordinator, Brian Hartline, because he's only been here for a year, and he works for a head coach who was also a play caller at one point. So if things would have really gone south for him as a play caller, Ryan Day just would have taken over, right? And if Brian Hartline said, actually, I don't want to help out and go try to win a national championship, I want to go start building my program in South Florida, Ryan Day would go, okay, somebody hand me a play sheet. And to Stefan's point, he can do that because once December hits, it's all about football. It becomes the most like the NFL that college football can possibly be in terms of what everybody's focus is. Brian Hartline has recruited at a level to start off his coaching career that's never been seen before with the number of 5 stars and top 100 recruits he has brought in here. In fact, his first 2 recruiting classes in 2020, 2 5 stars, 2 top 100 recruits. 2021, a 5-star and 2 top 100 recruits. He didn't have his first player outside of the top 100 until 2022. And then he followed that up with Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis, and then the next class he had Mylan Graham and Jeremiah Smith. And right now he's got Chris Henry Jr. as of right now as we're recording this, and he's got Jameer Brown in the 2027 class. So this is what he's doing. But then on the back end of that, Garrett Wilson, first-round draft pick. Chris Olave, first-round draft pick. Josh Smith-Njigba, wide receiver 1, first-round draft pick. Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver 1, first-round draft pick. Emeka Ibuka, first-round draft pick. Carnell Tate might be wide receiver 1, first-round draft pick. Jeremiah Smith is going to be wide receiver 1, first-round draft pick, and we'll see what happens after that. So there's a development part of this for Brian Hartline, and there's a recruiting element for Brian Hartline. Which one is going to be missed more at Ohio State?
I think it's the recruiting. No, I don't think it's close. Like, the development is one thing. I have seen other fans of programs and other people try to tear Hartline down of like, well, he's just bringing in the 5-star, so no wonder they're first-round picks. They show up ready to go. Okay. And like, he still needs to develop them, right? Like, they're still, they're still, big deals, right? So they still have to show up and, play and, get better. But the recruiting aspect is just different. Like, think about how different this offense looked without Carnell Tate when JJ played, right? Think about like the Purdue game. Like, I know that was like a game time decision, so maybe there wasn't as much there, but like Purdue and UCLA, like, think about how different that offense was. Forget not having JJ or Carnell or both of them. Like, I don't know. Like, take Carnell Tate off the field and look what happened. The offense did not look as seamless. There was definitely some growing pains. We all kind of alluded to it. Like, I think Stefan brought this up a couple times that I was crediting it with Steven, but it was actually Stefan, where he said, hey, that throw was meant for 17 or 4, not for Mylan Graham, when Julian overthrew Mylan Graham on like a go route one time. So I apologize for that. We have corrected the record. Thank you for Stefan, our ombudsman. But the recruiting aspect of this is just so different, because think about all the receivers. Like, Brandon Ennis is from Florida. Carnell Tate's from Chicago. Jeremiah Smith is from Florida. Okay, take one of those guys away and the offense is no longer superhuman. It's just good, like Jameer Brown, the 5-star in 27, that's somebody that Ohio State should probably get anyway, whether or not Brian Hartline's the receivers coach or in the offensive coordinator, or, Keenan Bailey or Ryan Day or Joe Schmo is the offensive coordinator and receivers coach. That's somebody you should land. But it definitely takes away from what this offense is and that superpower. And I said this on our video, like, we can't sit here and say Brian Hartline's the best at recruiting and developing receivers in the country, and then say somebody else is going to come in and it's going to be just as good, if not better. There's going to be a dip from Hartline to somebody, and it's going to come in recruiting. And maybe that's, you don't get another 5-star, right? It's you get Jameer Brown, and maybe you miss out Dakota Garant, and you miss out on Machin Sales, the other 2 5-stars in the receiver class that, they're really pushing for. Maybe you just miss one of them. But Ohio State has had a history of really good receivers. So I'll wrap up this like monologue with like, they'll be fine at receiver. Historically, they've been fine at receiver. The last time they won a national championship, which, by the way, Brian Hartline not here, Devin Smith, Michael Thomas, Jalen Marshall, and then they also had Curtis Samuel in that offense as well. They'll figure it out at receiver, but the recruiting element, I think, is very clearly going to go from unholy super weapon war machine to probably just pretty good, probably just really good. And I don't think that that's necessarily a cause for a ton of alarm.
So it is now 2:57, and Chris Henry Jr. has tweeted out the words, "I have not signed yet, still trying to weigh my options due to coaching changes. I just want to make the right decision for my future, God's plan." Yeah, it's again, Chris Henry Jr. committed to Ohio State in the summer of 2023. So when you wake up this morning thinking you're ready to sign with Ohio State and come spend a year learning from Jeremiah Smith before you take over as a wide receiver 1 potentially at Ohio State, and then all of a sudden an entire wrench gets thrown into that because Brian Hartline is officially leaving Ohio State, and you find that out 2 hours before you're supposed to sign a piece of paper. And I understand if that throws you for a bit of a wrench roll. I agree with you, Gillis. It's the recruiting element, and it's not because I don't think Ohio State will recruit elite receivers ever again. In fact, as much credit as we want to give Brian Hartline for Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, Ryan Day is the one who actually found both of those guys. Ryan Day found Chris Olave when he was out looking at the quarterback in California, and Ryan Day is the guy who recruited Garrett Wilson down there in Texas, and they will tell you as much. But in this era of NIL and portal and all this different stuff that's going on, I don't know if we'll ever see somebody stack wide receiver recruiting classes or any position group recruiting classes the way that Brian Hartline was doing them in a way that just seemed like it was a given. Right, we was all like, okay, well, Brian Hartline's going to get a 5-star, he's going to get a top 70 recruit, and then he might get some other guys in this class. But it was kind of every year, this is what he was going to do, and I'm just not sure if that will be the case again. And I do wonder if that happens, if it shows up on the field at some point. In terms of think about the pairings they've had here: Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, Mecca Ibuka and Marvin Harrison Jr. And that 2022 year should have also included Jackson Smith-Njigba in that mix. And then you go from that to a Mecca Ibuka, Carnell Tate, and Jeremiah Smith. And now you have Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, and Brandon Ennis. And next year it's going to be Jeremiah Smith and Brandon Ennis and Quincy Porter and Mylan Graham and Bryce. Right? We have lived in this world where Ohio State's wide receiver room has had a 2 deep where you had 6 guys in it. At bare minimum, 4 or 5 guys where you could look at them and go, okay, that guy would be a starter anywhere else in the Big Ten right now. And I don't know if that will be the case. I think the wide receivers will still be good, but I don't know if the depth of the wide receiver room will be quite the way it has been in the past. And I think that's where Brian Hartline will be missed the most. Any other thoughts on Brian Hartline that we want to bring up?
Well, it's probably worth, from a hot board perspective, mentioning, what is this?
Can I chime in on the recruiting thing real quick before we get into that? Because that might lead. Yeah. So I was going to say, it's Chris Henry Jr. is out there right now. He posted as we're talking about this that, he's taken some time with the coaching change. A 4-star receiver, Jaquaden Guilford, has also not submitted his paperwork as of 3:01 p.m. when we are recording this. So he is still out there. So those are the two: Jaden Ricketts, Brock Boyd. They have sent in their paperwork. Ohio State can freely talk about them. Caden Dixon-Wyatt, he is gone. He committed to USC, although I don't believe at this point.
Has he signed?
I don't believe he has submitted his paperwork, but he has flipped his decision to USC. So it seems as if he is going to be a Trojan and play in the Big Ten. We'll see what this means long term. Jameer Brown is the 5-star receiver in 2027. I know he and Hartline were very, very tight. I would have to imagine that Jameer Brown, who is, look, I've said this before. I'm 29 years old. I was not around to watch Ted Ginn play high school football. He is about the closest thing I can imagine to watching Ted Ginn play high school football. That kid can fly on the football field, and he is a true burner. I can only imagine that kid's phone is blowing up today from just about every other program in the country. I know he loved Notre Dame. I know he loved Maryland. I know he loved a couple of other different schools. There's a lot to unpack with this Hartline stuff, and we'll do that, obviously. But yeah, the recruiting aspect of Hartline, I think there's short and long-term things. I just wanted to talk about that because I don't know if we're going to have a chance to the rest of the way, because I don't know if you guys could pick this up. We're very scatterbrained. There has been a lot going on.
It's just about to happen because there's a lot of other really good kids in this recruiting class. And so we're going to dive into those kids next week.
You mean after they play number 1 versus number 2?
I just think
somehow it's still going on.
I just think that Kari Wilder and Sam Greer and Maxwell Riley and the way Ryan Day talked about Blaine Bradford on Wednesday, I think all these kids are interesting to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
It's just we're not going to do them justice if we sit here and try to talk about all those guys with a million other things happening.
Correct.
So unlike the NC, we are going to be logical and not try to talk about recruiting in the same week while there are a billion other things going on.
Yeah, Ryan Day said that he thinks that Kari Wilder can be like a day 1 impact player, and that's not a point.
Yes.
Like, that's what I'm saying. Like,
let's
just 70th today on the burner.
Right.
So
and it should be
get there, we promise.
And it should be a top 5 point. So that's what we're going to do.
We will get there. We do promise.
Go ahead, Stefan. There's too much happening. It's overstimulating.
Go to the hot board.
Yeah, we'll see where Ohio State goes from here now in terms of finding this offensive coordinator. Obviously, Chip Kelly is the top name that comes to mind with the Raiders firing him after that loss against the Browns a couple weeks ago. You look at internally on staff. Keenan Bailey is the co-offensive coordinator right now, so it's clear that Ohio State trusts him, and maybe he would be a candidate. Tyler Bowen, he doesn't have the co-OC title. He's just offensive line coach, but he has history calling plays. He was the offensive coordinator at Virginia Tech before this. Also kind of, not the exact coaching tree, but he did work with Urban Meyer in Jacksonville. So there is maybe some overlap there between Ryan Day and Urban Meyer and, Tyler Bowen, the way they view things. Tyler Bowen's obviously been a huge factor in what Ohio State's running game has done this year and the way that they've developed. Joe Moorhead, the head coach at Akron, comes to mind if he's someone who would want to be, play caller instead of a head coach. I think a name that's interesting, this is not me reporting that I've heard this name at all. I just think it would be interesting depending on what the Browns decide to do. And maybe our Browns folks are more apt to talk about this, but if there are changes to that coaching staff in any way, Tommy Rees has a great relationship with Julian Sayin. He was the offensive coordinator at Alabama when Sayin committed there. They had a really good relationship throughout that. And I think that, they've stayed in touch somewhat since then, with Reese being just up the road now in Cleveland. So that would be an interesting name. Of course, getting someone to leave the NFL to come to college football is a tough ask these days. But along that realm, maybe a guy like Brian Dable is an intriguing name. And he's got some free time now if he's not, I don't know. He might end up being the Penn State coach at this point. So who knows? We'll see what happens there. But the guy accidentally was caught wearing a Penn State sweatshirt one time. And now it's decided that he's the next coach because Penn State's got nobody else to choose from. It's going to be interesting to see, what happened. The timeline is going to be interesting too. Does Ryan Day strictly feel like he has to wait until the end of the season, at the end of the playoff, to hire someone? Or I don't know. I'm not saying that Brian Dable comes in as the offensive coordinator for the playoff, but you could hire him in January when the portal is open and say, hey, come transfer to Ohio State. This guy's going to be your offensive coordinator. Maybe he can work a bit in doing a sales pitch and things like that. So it's a fascinating couple of months coming up between games and the search for the offensive coordinator and the transfer portal and all that's coming. College football doesn't stop.
And I we can talk about the hot board. For Ryan Day, he should be able to kind of pluck whatever, where he should be able to make a well-timed hire and a good hire here. Yeah. Because think about where Ohio State's going to be after this year goes. You're going to have maybe the Heisman Trophy winner, definitely a Heisman finalist coming back at quarterback. And if you want to stick around for more than 1 year, there's a 5-star who's going to be entering his 3rd season after that in Tavian St. Clair. You have a running back who is a freshman and will be entering his 2nd year. You've got the best receiver in the sport and one of the best receivers in the last 25 years of college football entering his final season at Ohio State, along with, barring some mass exodus in the transfer portal. You're going to have some other talent at the position that's 4- and 5-star talent. The tight end room is what it is. The offensive line, all 5 starters might come back, maybe 4. There's going to be a lot of returning guys on that offense. It's going to be a very desirable job. And I think, I just brought that up to say, I don't think Day needs to rush this, right? They originally hired Bill O'Brien, and then Chip Kelly got hired in when January, February, at some point, kind of late in the winter, heading towards spring ball, and that worked out pretty well. So it does not have to be we have to get somebody before the portal opens hire. I think Ryan Day will certainly have his fair share of interested parties.
Yeah, I mean, Jim Knowles left in late December or late January, I should say. This is a lot more reasonable timeline to have to deal with, even if it is in the middle of your season.
Future Penn State head coach Jim Knowles? Is that who you mean?
At that point,
somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to be the one to do it.
This job is bigger than any one person. Ohio State's been good for a long time and will continue to be good. Nobody's bigger than the program. Ohio State's recession-proof. Okay, let's take a break, and then we also talked with Mark Pantoni today, and there's some big picture things I thought that he said that were quite interesting, and we'll get into that when we come back from the break here on Buckeye Talk.
Here's my 30-second story with Guinness. As soon as my sister and I get home for the holidays, we don't even unpack. We head straight to our pub. The bartender already knows our order, Guinness and fries. We laugh all night, catch up with old friends, and walk home with faces sore from smiling. It's one of my favorite nights of the year. That was my 30-second story with Guinness.
Guinness Draft Stout. Please enjoy responsibly. Imported by Diageo Beer Company, USA, New York, New York.
The who's down in Who Newville were making their list, but But some didn't know Walmart has the best brands for their gifts.
What about toys? Do they have brands kids have been wanting all year?
Yep, Barbie, Tony's, and Lego. Gifts that will make them all cheer.
Do you mean they have all the brands I adore?
They have Nintendo, Nespresso, Apple, and more.
What about...
So the Who answered questions from friends till they were blue. Each one listened and shouted, from Walmart? Who knew? Shop gifts from top brands for everyone on your list in the Walmart app.
The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in more places that could expose you more to identity theft. But LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, our US-based restoration specialists will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Don't face drained accounts, fraudulent loans, or financial losses alone. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This episode is presented by State Farm. Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like needing the protection of an offensive guard on the football field, but getting an elementary school crossing guard. Sure, they're both guards, but you can only trust one to keep your quarterback safe when the game is on the line. So don't settle for just any insurance when there's State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
And we're back here on Buckeye Talk. Stephen Means, Stefan Krajisnik, and Andrew Gillis on what is signing day. I don't know what to call this day. It's a lot. It's a lot going on. The point is we talk with Ryan Day for about 15 minutes, and then we talk with Mark Pantoni for about 20, 25 minutes as Ohio State continues to work to close on some members of its 2026 recruiting class. At the time that we're recording this, of the people who are still committed to Ohio State, I know Legend Bay flipped back to Tennessee. Did anybody else flip to other schools who was in the class when we woke up?
There were 3 flips today. Caden Dixon-Wyatt to USC, like I mentioned. There was a Legend Bay who goes to Tennessee. That's official. I don't believe that Caden's official right now. Legend is official. He has signed his paperwork, sent it into Tennessee. And then Caden Gebhart, an Olentangy safety, that was one in favor of Ohio State. He flipped from Clemson to Ohio State. That is done. So there were 3 flips today. Ohio State lost 2 kids, 1 receiver, and then 1 kind of athlete hybrid on offense, and then they brought in a safety. So lose 2, gain 1.
They play a football game on Saturday. Okay. Stefan, Pantoni got asked about a few individual players. We'll save that stuff for next week. But there was also some big picture conversations with Pantoni about some things about the way this is all working right now. He said he'll save his thoughts because he does think that there's a way for this to work that seems like it's logical. I do too. One of them is have a signing day in like August and then have another one in January and call it a day. But I think the big thing he hit on, and I think you might have been the one who asked it about the role Ross Bjork has played in this. Over especially the last 6 months where it seems like there was a time when maybe some fans were freaking out about what was going on the recruiting trail and maybe whether or not Ohio State was financially had the backing of their athletic director to do some things. And yet then we saw in the fall they maybe flip some things that maybe changed that tune. What did you ask Pantoni and what do you think of the answer he gave?
Yeah, I just kind of asked about the presence that Ross Bjork has had in all this because, if you remember back in June, Bjork was very adamant about, the new era of the revenue sharing, the way it was going to work and the way that, things were going to be enforced. And, he was part of the implementation committee. So, Ohio State's athletic director is someone who is heavily involved in the rules that are being enforced and being put in place and all that. So, it's not often that athletic director has much to do with a kid committing somewhere or going somewhere, right? Revenue sharing era, right? And now it's different where Ohio State's, athletic department is having to set aside a budget that's going towards NIL and things of that nature. And, the question I asked was more specific about how Ross Bjork, was there alongside Pantoni and Day during all this. And Pantoni had great things to say about Bjork and how helpful he was. But it lumped into some earlier questions too. I think one that you had asked, Stephen, just about negotiations and the battles and all this. It's clear that Ohio State's approach has been patience, right? Like from the administrative side and from Ryan Day and from Pantoni, it's been patience. In June, there was a lot. You heard the word a lot, front loading, the phrase a lot, front loading, in terms of schools giving a ton of money early on before they really thought things were going to be enforced before the rules were put into effect, but also before there was, certainty about how this was all going to be enforced, right? Like Michigan landed a lot of kids in June, so I'm going to use them for example, and I'm sure our listeners are fine with me using Michigan as a bad example here, but Michigan was landing a lot of kids, and there was the assumption that Michigan or USC is giving a ton of money to these kids because you're not going to actually be able to enforce this. What do you mean you're going to tell a collective that they can't give money as third-party NIL? And then things started getting enforced, and it was like, well, you can't actually do that because we're going to sue you and all this. Now, this is not a Michigan and USC specific thing. I just used them as an example because they did land a lot of kids in June. Ohio State was not landing a ton of kids in June, right? And that's not to say that Ohio State isn't competing in terms of NIL. They just weren't throwing out outrageous figures because they weren't necessarily desperate in June to land kids. They played the slow game. And as Gillis talked about, you get to October and November and now early December, and slowly but surely you saw kids starting to flip towards Ohio State and starting to get some interest towards Ohio State. And you saw this around the country of kids, backing out of commitments to some of these schools because, hey, that money you told me I was going to get in June, you lied. The money don't exist. That money ain't coming through. And they have to make, new decisions and figure out where they want to go. And suddenly those schools that were making realistic NIL offers and reasonable NIL offers, they were suddenly back in the mix because you were right. This is what I'm worth. This is what schools can actually offer me. I think that was maybe being overblown in a sense in June where it was like Ohio State is not willing to spend. That's not true. I'm sure the offer on the table for Chris Henry Jr. as we're recording is a very handsome offer. I'm sure what David Sanders was offered last year was a very handsome offer, right? Even before the revenue sharing stuff was necessarily put into place. But Ohio State has been strategic and not, just throwing everything. And Mark Pantoni told you in his answer to your question, Stephen, that like there is a price on everyone, right? And at a certain point, you don't say we're giving $5 million to a kid that we think is worth $1 million just because Oregon offered him $4.5 million, and those are all made up numbers, but I swear to God, I'm not reporting anything there.
No, you made them up, but just because you made them up doesn't mean that they're not real numbers.
Yes, exactly. So I get it. If you're an Ohio State fan, it's frustrating, right? Being patient is not always easy to do, especially when rivals in your conference are landing big time recruits. But I think at the end of the day, this is still a really good signing class for Ohio State, and they made some late pushes on some of these kids and made some flips and things of that nature. Like this signing class was not 28 players in June. This signing class, like there was a point, I think it was maybe around the second bye week in the Penn State game where, the three of us were kind of talking. We were like, they're starting to like land kids like quick. And this class is getting big pretty quick. And, Pantoni said it like a class of 28 kids is not cheap, right? Ohio State spent some money, but they waited. They waited to see the implementation of revenue sharing. They waited to see what the portal rules were going to be, right? Like landing 28 kids doesn't make a lot of sense when you have two portal windows and one of them is open now. You can start reevaluating pretty quick. But now Ohio State doesn't know what its roster is going to look like at the end of January. And by the end of January, their roster needs to be done, right? If Ryan Day doesn't know if Kenyatta Jackson's coming back right now, you got to sign a kid to be prepared for Kenyatta Jackson to not come back. Because at the end of January, if Kenyatta leaves, the portal's closed. You can't go get that player now. So Ohio State's kind of had to get some kids into his class now. And its patient approach, I think, in June is a big reason why a lot of this stuff is working out right now.
And that's like a 10-pole of Ryan Day's program at this point, right? Because you're saying that about the recruiting classes and the way they approached this cycle. You can literally just substitute some words for how Ryan Day is going to hire coordinators. Remember when it was like February, we were looking around like, is Ryan Day going to hire a defensive coordinator? What's going on there? Where's the defensive coordinator? How come he hasn't promoted Brian Hartline yet? Ryan Day is not in a rush to do anything. And he is in a position where he doesn't have to be in a rush to do anything. They can wait and see the wrong way. Because I think when you hear wait and see, it's like you're not, being on the ball. But it's making sure to cross all your T's, dot all your I's, all your ducks are in a row. Every other cliche you want to throw out there, making sure that's all in order. So when you go, you can go with confidence. And if that meant that in June, they slow played some things, maybe they walked away. I asked Mark Pantoni, like flat out, are there some recruitments in the cycle that you had to walk away from? He said, yes. If that means that has to happen, that's what has to happen, right? Because an example, I was listening to a podcast and I can't remember the name of the podcast, so I do apologize. But they were making this point about Bryce Underwood and the amount of money he got coming out of high school. If Bryce Underwood went on the open market right now, do you think he would get the same amount of money he got coming out of high school? Probably not. Because now you've played, right? Your value is in what you have done, and once you're no longer an ID, it goes up or down. Jeremiah Smith, there was probably an amount he could have gotten out of high school. You think that's going up or down? It's going up, right? And all down the line there. So these are conversations you have to have, and why, whether it was Day or Pantone today, Gillis, it was a constant. Evaluation is more important than ever because you have to be right. They think Kari Wilder is a dude, and they thought that long before any recruiting website, whether it's On3, Rivals, 247 Sports, had him rated as a highly rated recruit. They thought Sincere Johnson was a dude before everywhere else. So just because everybody else is catching up now doesn't mean they didn't think so then, because they have to be right about that evaluation, because to Stefan's point, you don't have 2 windows to correct your mistake in the portal anymore. You have one. And even in the portal, you have to be right. With all due respect to Ethan Inyawa, that's a miss. You can't afford to have the Ethan Inyawa situation again on the offensive line, which is why for you, Gillis, this is the thing I was most interested in with Pantone, was the way he was talking about the offensive line and defensive line recruiting. He was way more just like open and about some of this stuff than I thought he would be on a microphone. But there's obviously what you asked, Day, about the job that Tyler Bowen did. He called it thorough, and that stuff is great. But I think that the point that Mark Pantone was making of the guys in the trenches are going to be way too expensive on the back end.
Yeah, this is kind of the point that I've been making on Buckeye Talk for quite some time, is that it's an ebb and a flow, right? It's a mix. And I think there's a lot of people who will say, I don't want to pay for Jakeem Stewart. He's too much money. Okay, all right. That's totally fine. That's a totally fair thing to say. But just know that if you think Jakeem Stewart's going to be good and he does hit the portal in 2 years, like, oh, well, USC, they're going to be a mess with Lincoln Riley. He's not going to make it through the 2026 season. Okay, but he's going to hit the portal. And if you think Jakeem Stewart's going to be good, he's not going to be cheap. So I've said this many times, like, if you gave me a position to build out, it would be quarterback. And then right after that would be defensive line. Like, if you could say, Andrew, you get to have 2 dominant national title, holy crap, positions on your team. It's quarterback and it's defensive line. That's what I'm doing. And that's what I'm building out. So yeah, it's an interesting ebb and flow. You have to figure out what's right, what's not, what's a good dollar figure for something, what's not. Is it worth it to full bore for this? Because Ohio State can talk all they want about Kari Wilder, but if Kari Wilder was committed to insert other program here, and then he hit the portal in 2 years, and Ohio State said, well, we loved him then and we love him now, he's not going. It's the inverse Bryce Underwood thing that you were saying, right? It's okay. He's still going to be expensive. Like Chaz Coleman, if he were to hit the portal from Penn State, he's going to be expensive. So he's going to be a lot of money. So you have to kind of decide like future value, and like you have to determine what a guy's going to be worth in a year and 2 years and 3 years. It is not just what are you worth now. It's your future value. It's the same thing with like David Sanders. It's like you could be okay with not paying David Sanders, but just so you know, if you want to go get David Sanders out of the portal and he's good, because that would be the reason why you're going to get him. You're not going to go get David Sanders, who's like a broken football player, and say like, we're going to fix him. Like, that's probably not smart business. Like, just think about the offensive line. Who has Ohio State gotten on the offensive line in the last couple of years? They got Seth McLaughlin, really, really good addition. But he was also a center. He didn't play tackle. He came in, he won the Remington. That was about as good of a thing as you could hope for. They had to go get San Diego State's right tackle, Josh Simmons, try to make him a left tackle. And it took like half the season in 23 for him to be decent. Vic Cutler, that didn't really work out. Ethan Inyanwa, that didn't really work out. Defensive line, you look at like a Bo Atkinson. He's a depth player, right? Like, you have to be smart with your money. And I asked Mark Pantone, he didn't really answer the question, but I basically said, like, how do you know when to push and when to not? Because I think it's a good thing to say, hey, we want to wait for senior film. And it's a good thing to say, hey, we want to make sure our investments are right. But it's also a risky business.
I can give you an answer.
It was a risky proposition, but go ahead.
I can give you the answer to the question. How quickly do they look like an NFL player, even as a teenager? That's the answer to the question.
Yeah, but I guess my point is, like, Ohio State likes Kamari Bing, who committed today, signed today. he was a 3-star player from Maryland, and they say, well, we need to see some senior film. They also got in a battle with Bama for Kamari Bing. Like, it wasn't just Ohio State that saw him. So, how do you know that, you're going to do that? So he said you got to be aggressive with your junior film and your sophomore film. And if you like what you see, then you really push for it. And he kind of gave a generic answer. But
no, it's what I'm saying to you. You got to look like an NFL player as a sophomore and junior in high school, or just project out that way. Listen, I mean, that's a risk, right? It's always going to be a risk both ways, right? There's been players in the past where, like Dylan Raiola, they landed a commitment from him 2 years before signing day, and he didn't make it to signing day. And he's not the only one. There's been plenty of players from Florida who weren't quarterbacks that they landed early, and it didn't work out. Just like, sure, there are some players where you waited till senior film, and it worked out or it didn't work out. They didn't get C.J. Stroud until late in the process. There's no perfect formula to that. What they're saying essentially is the reason they're waiting on senior film is because, again, they want to turn over every stone. With these guys,
you don't have as much info as possible.
Yeah, with these guys where it's not like, you and I could look at that kid and go, oh, that guy's going to be an NFL player one day. I don't know what round he's going in, but he looks like he's going to be making a 53-man roster when he's 23, 24 years old. You want to be right, because we're still dealing with teenagers who every 6 months you see them and they're physically different than the last 6 months that you saw them. So I get it from that standpoint. I think from the trenches standpoint, this isn't about like, oh, I didn't bring in that kid. All right, you better hope you weren't wrong. It's more about the guys you bring in, you better be right about. They think Kari Walder, Emmanuel Ruffin, Dre Quinn, Bari Simeon, Braxton Rembrandt, Jameer Perez, and Darius McKinley can help them on the defensive line. You better be right, because it's expensive to go get it doesn't have to be Jakeem Stewart. It could be whoever Bo Atkinson is next January. That guy's going to be expensive. They think Sam Greer, Maxwell Riley, Mason Willem, Tucker Smith, and Landry Breed can be starter-level players at Ohio State. Everybody's not on the same developmental plan as all those guys, right, Stefan? When we look at Sam Greer, it's like that dude should be in a 2D in 2026, right? Versus you look at Tucker Smith, and it's like, okay, maybe he's on a Josh Fryer type of plan where you check in on him in year 3 and maybe he's ready to go win a battle for you. But they think those guys can contribute to winning football at Ohio State. You better be right, because it doesn't matter if it's a former 5-star recruit or it's someone with Josh Simmons' background. If they hop in the portal, offensive and defensive linemen are going to be expensive because they're not a dime a dozen the way skilled positions are. But again, doesn't it work like that in the NFL? Right? The most expensive people are the trenches people and then your superstars, which is why I'll close with this. They're running this like an NFL team. Mm-hmm. Mark Pantoni said it. If you look in the NFL, who are the teams who are having success right now? It's the ones who have a successful day on draft day, not the people who are winning in free agency. The Philadelphia Eagles, they drafted a lot of those dudes, man. The Chiefs, they drafted a lot of those dudes, man. Yeah, they supplemented and brought in a couple of people here or there. I'll get there. They brought a couple of people in here or there that are free agency signings, but the stars of their teams are people they drafted. Gillis, you're a Commanders fan, right? So much of what they've done rests on the players they've drafted, and they've supplemented with some free agency and some trades here and there. Stefan, they've built off of the draft to the best of their ability. Both of you root for poverty programs, so I can't relate, man. My team has played at a Super Bowl in the past 10 years. I'm a Falcons fan, and we drafted well. I would like for us to turn those draft picks into tangible wins. So please, turn them into tangible wins. But we're getting sidetracked. The point of the matter here is recruiting is the draft. Mm-hmm. And you better be right about your draft picks, because now they cost money. Mm-hmm. Because if you're going to go get a guy in a free agency, that's going to cost you even more money than they would on the recruiting trail. Yeah. On top of the fact of the culturistic part of it's easier as an 18-year-old to come in here and fall in line with the culture versus someone who's 21 years old and has been developed somewhere else and is trying to fall in line with that. I think regardless of what you think of the class, first of all, the class is fine. It's I get it. Chris Henry, we're still trying to figure out if that's happening or not. And they lost a very, very important person to their offensive coaching staff on Wednesday. But this is Ohio State. Nobody's bigger than the program. And I still think this is a pretty quality class. And I think it was great that Mark Pantoni got up there, because everything that I think we have been trying to say for 6 months, but we have been trying to convey that information of like, hey, we've talked to people in the building, but we're also looking at the results. To hear it from the direct source of the guy who's running things, that is what you need to take from this, is that Ohio State has a plan and they're executing that plan. And they are playing for the long game. And every time so far in the last 18 months that they've played for the long game, it has worked out. And there's no reason to think that won't continue to be the case going forward, even if Brian Hartline is no longer a part of that plan.
Yeah, Ryan Day. Something else that Ryan Day and Mark Parentoni, I believe, got asked was about the size of the class. This goes into the portal stuff too. I think the question was asked. I think it was Garrick Hodge who asked. Was basically like, "Hey, is this the new norm? Are these size classes going to be what you guys want?" And the answer was kind of yeah. Like this is what we're going to want to do. Ohio State entered today with 28 verbal commitments. They were expecting to sign 28. Obviously, there was some movement there, as we've alluded to and we've talked about. There was some movement that could still happen, but you got to be kind of ready for everything, because we've mentioned it on this pod. Okay, you could load up at a certain position, and you kind of have to, because hey, they took 4 safeties this class, right? They have Blaine Bradford, they have Simeon Caldwell, Kamari Bing, and they got Caden Gebhardt today. Okay, well, Caleb Downs is going to go. Jalen McClain will be back. What happens if Leroy Roker enters the portal? Or somebody else enters and says, hey, I want to go. Or, we've talked about it, defensive line. Kenyatta Jackson, what if he's telling Ohio State, this is hypothetical, what if he's telling Ohio State, oh, I'm going to come back. Yeah, I want to come back. I want to be here for another year. And then Kenyatta Jackson has 8 sacks in 3 playoff games, and somebody gets in his ear and says, you might be a first-round pick. You might be a top 50 pick. Things can change. And Ohio State at that point in time won't be able to adjust. So Ohio State, I think, is doing the right thing here, where they're not reacting. They're being proactive to a situation that could hurt them, and they're trying to avoid that by any means necessary. And like you said, Pantoni and Day both kind of alluding to that and talking about it, saying, this is why we're doing this, I think was pretty illuminating.
Another kind of interesting thing I want to close with as well is we haven't seen Ohio State use the transfer portal for receivers at all. That's a new element to this, right? Because, obviously to use the portal, you probably need to lose guys as well, right? Because Ohio State's been bringing in, elite talent from recruiting, but also retaining a lot of talent at receiver as well. We'll see what the repercussions are with the roster in terms of if guys leave that are already on the roster because of Brian Hartline's departure. I'm not going to speculate in any way because we don't know any of that yet. But that's an interesting thing, right? And we'll see what happens with Chris Henry Jr. and all this stuff. Like, if Ohio State needs receivers, they have not turned to the portal, or have really had to turn to the portal in recent years. Could that be something that happens? I don't know. I mean, you look at the portal, there are no guys in the portal. There are guys who are reportedly expecting to enter the transfer portal, like Nick Marsh at Michigan State, right? They're having a coaching change, and he's going to enter the portal, and he's going to be one of the hot names. So in January 2nd, when he enters the portal, I'm sure teams will wait until them to reach out to him. So when that happens, that's a fascinating name, right? Already on the market. You think about other guys that are going to be on the market. It gets really interesting. So that is an element where Ohio State haven't dipped their feet into that water yet of transfer portal for receiver talent. So that'll be an interesting mix, or thing thrown into the mix here as well.
And that was a philosophical thing, right? Ryan and Hartline prided himself on being able to tell recruits, I'm not going to, your development is your own path. You come here, get ready to work and find a way on the field. I'm not going to bring in guys to jump in front of you and disrupt that. And I think he's the only position group on this roster since the portal has become a thing that has not brought in guys from the transfer portal. And that was the philosophical thing. And he liked being able to tell receivers that. We've been questioning for a couple of years how much longer that could happen. And I think even if he'd have been back here, Stefan, I think this would have been the first cycle we would have wondered, like, hey, do you need to do so? And I think some of that is based on what we've seen from the receivers so far, mixed with there are so many guys moving around right now. Penn State, man, still doesn't have a coach that, I don't know, like you brought up Nick Marsh. We'll see who else might hop in the portal here over the next month or so. But maybe there might be some options in there that are like, listen, you can't pass up that option for the sake of standing on a philosophical thing.
Penn State's getting some momentum in terms of keeping Terry Smith based on some of the reports that are out there. And like one of the reports that suggest like why they should keep him is that he played a big role in signing like a 4-star quarterback. Like, you could be in a much worse spot. You could be a program that's having to promote an interim head coach because he helped you land a 4-star quarterback. Like, rough.
Because you fired your head coach. Because you fired your head coach who created a lot of stability at your program for the last 12 years because you thought you could do better, and then you're finding out that maybe you got in a little over your skis.
Keeping coaches for recruits is always bad practice. I don't care if it's Jeremiah Smith. If you don't think the coach can hack it as a coach or as a recruiter, you cannot keep them because of one guy. That's an Ohio State take, but it's also for everybody else.
I think
can't do it.
I think JJ is the exception, and I'm not here to discuss it. It's just whatever the rules are in sports, Jeremiah Smith, LeBron James, I think, Myles Garrett, those guys are just the exception. And the fact that all those guys played in Ohio at one point is insane. I know, man. Look at that. And only one of them is actually from Ohio. I think there are a few exceptions to the rule. To Gillis's point, it would still be stupid, but I think if it's because of JJ, I'd be like, all right, yeah, I get it. It's dumb, but I get it. I get why you're doing it. 614-350-3315. As you're listening to this, Chris Henry Jr. has still not signed with any school. So if it happened on Wednesday,
you'll find out first that way.
Yeah, if it happened on a Wednesday, then you found out through the text first, 614-350-3315. It's a 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. So much happening. While also we have not decided a champion in this. We haven't even decided the field yet, and yet there are so many things happening in college football. This is such a great sport, and the people in charge of it just run it in the worst way you could possibly run a sport. It's just crazy. Hartline said this once. He was like, it's just crazy. All the pro sports have figured out how to do this. How come we can't? When we funnel our kids to these leagues. It's insane. But there's that. Ohio State, they have a top 10 class as of the time we're recording this. All but 2 of the current people committed in that class have signed. It's 2 wide receivers. Maybe they'll sign by the end of Wednesday evening. Maybe they won't. I guess we'll find out. 614-350-3315. 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. Live show today at 2 p.m. As Stefan said, we're previewing a number 1, number 2 matchup in the Big Ten championship game. Oh, I love this sport. So hopefully we see you there. For Stefan and Andrew, I'm Steven. Talk to you guys later.